Hello and welcome everyone to the first edition of the Wooclap Education Summit 2021, hosted by Wooclap. The Wooclap Education Summit is an international online event that lasts one day with 16 live sessions in three languages, French, English, and Spanish. And this year we've got more than 30 speakers and over 1,000 participants. The aim of the Wooclap Education Summit is to bring together teachers, EdTech innovators, and experts from all around the world to discuss current and future issues in education and to compare our points of view. So thank you all for coming today. It's a bit of context about Wooclap. Wooclap is an EdTech company that develops two tools. First, we have Wooclap, which is an online platform which, thanks to its 15 types of questions, allows teachers to interact and measure the comprehension rate of their students. And a link is being made available to you with a bit more information about that. The second platform is Wooflash, which allows you to follow the progress of students and to accompany them in their revisions. There's another link being sent to you. And last little piece of information, Wooclap integrates into different LMSs such as Moodle and Canvas. And today, more than 500,000 teachers around the world use our platforms, whether it's in the classroom, remotely, or even asynchronously. Otherwise, I'll invite you to send all your questions today and reactions in the chat and share the event on social media with the hashtag Wooclap Education Summit. And now I'm excited to start with our first session of the day. It's been a challenging year full of unpredictable events that have surely left a mark on all of us and the way we think about education, which is why we thought it would be interesting to take some time to all meet and discuss the burning question of what will the education of tomorrow look like. And to start off this day of exchange, we're joined by experts in the field of education to answer the first question of how can universities stay attractive post-COVID, in the post-COVID era. Make that a bit bigger for you. And now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our two speakers today. We have with us today, I'm joined by Caroline King, Senior Learning Technologies Coordinator at the International Study Centres for Study Group UK and Europe, as well as Mark Brown, who is a Director of the National Institute for Digital Learning at Dublin City University. Caroline, Mark, thank you for being here with us today. And now, before we answer the general question of how can universities remain attractive post-COVID, I thought it might be interesting to start our conversation with a question for our audience, a quick question, and you can connect through the following link that you can see up here by either clicking that link that's being made available to you in the chat, or you can also scan the QR code. And I'm waiting till I can see I have enough participants. I can see that you're gradually connecting to the event. Thank you for participating. Give you a little bit more time to connect. Great, and you can continue to connect through the link in the chat, and I'm move on to our question. Rate the following element on a scale of 1 to 5. I was prepared to teach in the context of COVID, and my institution was prepared to teach in the context of COVID. So we're interested to have your feedback on this question to start sort of framing our question and framing the discussion we're going to have today with Mark and Caroline. And interesting to see already your input, maybe some differences between how teachers were prepared and institutions were prepared. I know that's definitely something we might touch on today. Thank you for the feedback that we're collecting. I see that mostly people didn't feel that prepared for the current context. Thank you for your participation. And I'm going to move on to the first question. Maybe we should start, I think, by asking ourselves why universities were attractive in the first place. And maybe we can start by asking Mark Brown, that's here with us today. Mark, why do you think universities were attractive in the first place?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello everyone. Good to be with you. For me, there's a question that sort of comes with that question, which is we have to be, I think, a little bit self-critical that universities weren't attractive for everyone. So for whom were they attractive? And, you know, the cold, stark reality is that mostly it's those who already have some kind of advantage in life that get the opportunity to attend universities. Not exclusively, but we do a pretty good job in universities of reproducing privilege. So that's something we need to be mindful of as we think about building back better. The other thing is we tend to think about, if I'm asking for whom, too often a focus on, school leavers. They're the ones who are thinking about and what makes university attractive to them. Again, one of the realities is that actually increasingly universities are places for mature adult learners. That's a worldwide trend in developing countries. So we need to be very careful about who we're thinking about when we answer this question. Those are different answers for a young person leaving school as opposed to someone who might be defined as a learner and earner. But to come back to the question, why we know universities have a certain attraction because they have a brand, a degree we know confers huge benefits for you both privately, personally, and professionally and publicly. We have overwhelming evidence. People have better health. They pay more tax in life because they earn more, so on and so forth. Though I'm going to come back to later, I think, because we're working off old data. Maybe the world has changed. But the one thing I do know that universities, why they're attractive, and that word attraction is actually an important one here, is there are indirect benefits. Many people actually meet their lifelong partners when they're at university. There are all sorts of things that happen in universities outside of the classroom that make it attractive. And that's something we shouldn't lose sight of as well.
Thanks for that, Mark. Very interesting. I think that must be important for international students as well, I would imagine, Caroline. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about what you think makes a study group attractive for students, and particularly in the international context.
Well, first of all, unfortunately, I didn't meet my lifelong partner at university. I did get a pretty sweet PhD out of it, but just to give some context to Study Group, in case you've not heard of us and what we do. Study Group is an education provider. We have 17 ISCs linked to university partner institutions all across the UK and Europe, as well as 2 Bellerby's colleges. And we then offer progression opportunities to over 70 UK and EU universities. So we primarily teach international students. And I think that means we have quite a strong understanding of what motivates international students to come and study in the UK and EU. So one of the biggest draws is prestige, that prestige that's attached to UK and EU institutions. And that's due to the creative and challenging environment that our universities provide. It's not just rote learning or memorizing, facts, but we actually try to develop critical thinking skills and a more creative learning environment. We also have really highly regarded teaching standards in the UK and Europe, and that really draws in a lot of students. One of the other big draws for international students, but also I think for domestic students, is that universities create a multicultural environment at a basic level that allows students to work on and develop their English language skills. But in a broader sense, it also helps them develop cultural awareness, communication skills, team working skills, all those things you use in a real world modern working environment. So like right now, we're all working online. We're chatting to people, you know, Mark mentioned he was chatting to people in Australia this morning. I chat to people all around the UK and Europe. We are working in a very sort of multicultural environment. So really our learning environment should reflect that. So what I get out of it is it's not just about the sharing of knowledge. That's not what attracts students. It's the way that knowledge is shared. What differentiates universities from just picking up a textbook on a subject and learning about it is the social aspect of learning. So when you come to a university and you learn a module, you have access to a learned tutor who can answer your questions, encourage your critical thinking skills, help develop your theories further, give you feedback, give you encouragement, you know, help develop your learning skills. And there's quite a lot of support for this. So one I heard recently was the 2021 JISC Student Digital Experience Insights survey really supports this idea about social aspects of learning. A lot of the things that students were saying in that survey about what they wanted to see was they wanted to learn in smaller groups. They wanted tutorials, you know, they wanted to be able to have more direct access to their tutor and experience a three-way communication in class so that they can learn from and with their peers. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that social side of university learning and maximize that student to tutor FaceTime. So it's not just a one-way communication, but you know, a three-way communication in the classroom. And that will really help us maintain the attractiveness of universities.
Really interesting input. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, very interesting talking about the social aspect of it and kind of looking at, well, in our current context, how do we incorporate that social aspect? Which really brings me to the second question we have today. How do we remain attractive and give the students the experience that they expect, but also the experience that they deserve? I don't know if, Mark, you want to touch on this?
Yes, well, thank you. I will expand, I think, on what I called the sort of indirect as well as the social benefits here. The beginning point, I think, for us is to recognize that face-to-face teaching is not quite the gold standard that we thought it was. Actually, some of us knew that before COVID came along. The research literature is quite overwhelmingly shows that mode of delivery isn't a factor that influences the quality of the student experience. It's what happens in the mode. But right now, a hybrid mode is very much what we would be wanting to offer to add that attractiveness for students, both in a formal sense, but also in the social and informal. And so in my mind, I talk about and have this idea, if you like, of a rich digital learning ecology where the informal and the formal aspects come together, where the virtual and the physical are seamlessly melded together. So in a hybrid cultivation that makes something better. Not blended learning, because blended is about throwing everything into the blender and hoping it tastes good. This is a very intentional approach to ensure that you're getting something better that you're cultivating. So what we know is that those opportunities for informal interactions outside of the physical classroom, but of course that informal interaction can also take place online. It does well before COVID. Millions of people interact online, socially. So that's what we need to capture to maintain a really rich learning experience and move away from what I describe as the dump, pump model of learning. But whether that be physical learning in lectures or online learning where all we do is produce content and try to pour it into the head of learners. As you heard from Caroline, that's not what students are looking for. They do want also assessment that makes sense to them, that prepares them for the real world, authentic assessment. So let's see if we're going to go back to throwing our students into large rooms and have examinations, physical examinations, where for 3 hours they have to hold a pen, which never in my life in the last 10 years have I had to hold a pen for 3 hours and write non-stop. It just doesn't happen in my life, in my world. And I don't think it happens in most cases. So more authentic approaches to how we do assessment. Caroline touched on transversal skills, skills for life. I'll talk about, in my writing, high road transfer, and that is thinking about the transfer of assessment to real situations. And an examination hall is not a real situation. But I'll stop on that note. Actually, maybe one little afterthought that's come to me. I like to have an item bank of good quotes. So Michelle Obama, we all know Michelle, or not personally probably, but she has a great quote. She says, "If my future were determined just by my performance on a standardized test, I wouldn't be here. I guarantee you that."
Food for thought. Thank you, Mark, for that input. That was very interesting. And Caroline, maybe you can tell us what actions you put in place at study group to remain attractive, kind of pulling on what Mark said as well.
Yeah, certainly. And I'll clarify at the beginning, when I talk about we, I'm talking about a huge team of really engaged staff at study group who've done this. I am in no way claiming credit for any of this. I'm just the one that's talking about it. I don't need to tell anyone here how difficult the move to online was at first. I think we can all agree it was not a cakewalk. Everyone found it difficult in different ways. We had a really interesting situation where we struggled with consistency because, as I said, we've got so many different centres, and each of those has different tools and platforms available to them. So some use the platform available at their partner institution. Some use our Moodle platform. So we have centres that are on Moodle, some that are on Blackboard, Blackboard Ultra, Canvas, and Brightspace. We've got centres using Zoom and Teams and Collaborate. So we had all this different stuff. That makes it really hard to have a consistent approach. Luckily, one of the projects that we are still working on, but had started before COVID, was to have a shared suite of tools that we can all use. We've got things like H5P, we've got a license for that all our centres can use, whether they're on Moodle or not. And before the pandemic, we were already using Wooclap for increasing interactivity in live classes, in big, large lectures. We were trying to find a tool that would help us engage students when they are in that large room. So we were really lucky in that sense that when we moved to online, we had users and advocates in each centre who were already using some of these tools and able to support the transfer of those tools to an online environment. So once the chaos died down a little bit, I mean, it never really goes away, but once we could take a breath, we started looking at trying to establish a more consistent approach to that blended learning. And we wanted to try and keep a little bit of space for creativity, but also acknowledge the limitation of some tools. So experts from the academic office developed what we call our blended learning checklist. And that's based on the 6 learning types of Professor Diana Laurillard's conversational framework, along with a lot of good practice and ideas that we got from different centres and staff in the network that we kind of pulled together. I'm not going to go through the whole checklist, but some of the key things I think are really important I'd like to touch on. We encouraged the use of pre-recorded videos and chunking. So those videos were made available on the VLE in smaller videos of less than 10 minutes preferably. And alongside those pre-recorded videos, we had asynchronous and synchronous activities like discussions, practice questions, self-paced activities that students could do using things like H5P and Wooclap and Padlet and inbuilt VLE tools like forums and quizzes and so on. And what we found was that helped us maximize that social learning aspect of the live classes. So in the live sessions, you could have smaller group tutorials or breakout rooms or discussions, because it wasn't just the teacher talking. That could be delivered in a different format. And it gave us an opportunity to really explore student contributions in those live classes. They could contribute, via Wooclap or Padlet or the chat box, and actually give something back during that live session. Another part of the checklist was guidance on the structure and consistency of the VLE page. We wanted to make sure it was easy to navigate, because you miss out on that opportunity to be in the classroom with the students, going through it on their computer and saying, click here, do this and that. They need to be able to land on that page and know exactly where to go and what to do with what's on there. So we encourage lots of narrative text with instructions and context for the learning. Mark mentioned exams, and big proponent of changes to assessment. The move for us was we took a lot of the exam stuff and exam sessions and moved them to assessment or online quizzes and things. Our only exception was our English language tests, because they're secure English language tests for visa purposes. They had to be proctored online. But for most other assessments, we tried to provide an alternative. But the last thing I want to mention that we tried to replicate in that online environment is probably the hardest, and that's the social aspect. As I said, it's really important, but it's very hard to get that in the online environment. So we tried to add a human face to modules in the VLE. We encouraged video introductions to the module and the tutor as well, and that narrative text throughout allowed a bit of the tutor's personality to come out. Forums and chat rooms and things like that, where the students can actually learn and get to know their tutor. We encouraged things like icebreakers in induction sessions, where students were given a kind of structured task to do to encourage them to talk and get the conversation going, group activities, breakout rooms, that kind of thing. And I have to say, hats off to all of the teachers that took that on board, because we saw some amazing examples of creativity there. Some great ideas for icebreakers and activities, wikis, word clouds, speed friending events. That was one of my favorites, where you're encouraging the students to meet new people. And what I think that created was a safe environment, a structure, but not too clear, where students could speak up and interact with their tutor and each other and have that bit of encouragement. So I'll stop there.
Thanks for that, Caroline. Super interesting to see how flexible you were and how able you were to adapt to the current situation. Very interesting. And before we move on to our next part now, I thought it'd be interesting to get your input again on another question. So I'll make that available to you here. And if you're still connected, we'd like to ask you, what did you learn from teaching at a distance? Don't hesitate to send in your answers. It's still the same link for connecting. I have a quick question for Caroline. We have enough time to ask it. Martin Holt is asking Caroline, how did you organize the speed meeting event?
Yeah, I've just mentioned in the chat, I didn't organize it. Some of our experts are actually in the chat in this session who did it, but it was done in Zoom with breakout rooms. That was what was used for that. But yeah, please feel free to jump in and give more detail on that, colleagues that are in the chat.
Thanks. As you can see now, the word cloud is changing. A lot of breaks are needed. See, that's coming up. Interactivity is key to learning experience. Interactive lessons, yes. how important. Yep. Interesting to see all your points of view. Maybe we can get back to that after we answer our next question, which is, what did we learn, and what practices will we keep? Like to maybe ask. Sorry, Caroline, that you only gave you a second to catch your breath there. But what were your main takeaways at study group, and what would you say you learned here for this last year?
Thanks, Kieran. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to say all of it, but obviously not all of it has been positive. But there are a huge number of changes to the way we teach that it would be nice to retain when we move back to normality. Linking back to what Mark said right at the start about privilege that goes along with universities and studying at them, and how that can be sometimes exclusionary. Um, I think what this has allowed to happen is a removal of some of the traditional barriers to learning. We've made great strides in accessibility, inclusivity, flexibility. We regularly provide materials in different formats, whether that's to meet the needs of a student who has very poor internet connection, or, for whatever reason, we're providing materials in different formats. We've got videos that are using tools that quite often allow for automatic captioning, which is great for students with hearing disabilities, but also students who are learning English as a second language, or a student who's learning on the bus but doesn't have their headphones. There's so many different things that we've put in place that can make learning easier for everyone. So I'd really like to see, these ideas like thoughtful timetabling and letting students really take control of their learning and planning how and when they complete their tasks to continue. As I said, it has benefits to students with disabilities, but also those with personal circumstances or even learning preferences that find traditional learning environments stressful or even exclusionary. So I think it's really important that we don't just rush back to erecting all those unnecessary barriers to learning again, and that we look at what we've opened up. I'd like to see us make the most out of the face-to-face time that we have. That move, as Mark said, it's not a new idea, of the move from the stage on the stage to, a different strategy. And I think that three-way discussion in the classroom is really important. We've learned a lot about what an engaged student looks like. So in the past, we could kind of assume that if a student was in your classroom and awake, they were engaged. That was the assumption we made. They're there, their eyes are open, we're good. And online, we couldn't do that. We had to look for ways to interact with the students and check that they understood and check that they were following along and that they were participating. And we had to be quite considerate of technological or personal limitations on that. So we gave choice. We let them contribute by polls or microphones or videos or chat boxes, like we're doing now with the chat box here. And I think it'd be really nice to retain that in the face-to-face classroom, so that the quieter students still have a way to engage and to participate in the lesson. And another big one is assessment. I know Mark's going to talk a bit about this as well, but assessment is a big one. My key thing I would say is we need to stop chasing that mythical technological solution to cheating. It's an arms race that we're just not going to win. That solution isn't out there, but instead we can apply all that energy to developing authentic assessments that actually reflect real world experiences and can't be cheated on. It's like Mark said about the holding the pen. I've never written an essay in my professional career, but I've done lots of other activities that it would have been useful to practice in uni. But the final one, the big important lesson that I really would like to see us keep doing is involve students in their own learning. Like, we're asking each other right now, how do universities remain attractive? What should we do? The students know. They can tell us. We should be asking them. We should give them choices in how they learn. We should survey them regularly, not just at the end of term, but near the start. So if there is a big problem, we can fix it before it's too late, before they're already disillusioned. But most importantly, just talk to them. Talk to them in your lessons, talk to them in emails, chat, forums, wherever you are interacting with the students. Talk to them, but don't talk at them. Really listen to what they've got to share, because learning shouldn't be one way. The students have a lot to give back to us as well.
Really interesting, Caroline. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, putting students at the heart of as well the decision-making process. Super interesting. Thanks for your input there. And yeah, now I'm curious to know, Mark, would you like to share your vision of what you think we learned during this past year? I think your microphone's off. There we go.
Thanks. That's one of those expressions that we've all learned. You're on mute. I couldn't resist but put a little self-publicity in the chat box there to a webinar that we're hosting this afternoon on the online learner and the next normal. What valuable lessons have students taught us? But a couple of things really that follow from what we've already discussed. I want to come back to this idea that somehow face-to-face teaching was the gold standard and that online was inferior. What we've learned is actually there are elements of face-to-face of what we've done in the past that haven't been that great. And if we're really honest with ourselves, even at Stanford, there's literature that says that only 60% of students attended lectures. This is well before COVID. So there are lectures and there are lectures. I'm a great defender of the lecture when done well. And if you want to engage with a really interesting debate on the topic of the lecture, I've just put a link to a webinar we had a few weeks ago on that topic. But I think we have to revisit our conception of, again, I'll go back to something that's hybrid, building back better. See, when you cultivate, and I'm using an ecological sort of metaphor here, when you're intentionally cultivating something to be better, you don't just leave that to chance and think that if you throw something else in and something else, it will be better. Sometimes it can be worse by adding more things. Another example in the context of lectures is students are telling us, and we have an Islander survey where I think 64% of the students responding to a very large national student engagement survey say they want more videoed lectures when they go back. I think there's a balance here, and this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. My answer to that sort of drive, if you like, is I go to the supermarket, every week. I go down the rows to get what I want, and sometimes I see things standing out that I know are not good for me. They're not healthy, but I might still choose them. So I absolutely endorse students as partners and co-designing and constructing of learning, but we also have to be mindful of what we know as well. So the fact that I will buy the chocolate, even though I know it's not good for me, doesn't mean we should keep supplying people with chocolate, or probably the better example would be sugar-filled drinks. So there's a balance here. There is a time when it's appropriate, and there are other times where you probably do want to do this in person. The last point I've got to make, and I touched on this right at the outset when you asked me the question, what makes universities attractive? We knew previously that universities were attractive for many of the benefits they confer, rightly or wrongly, and I touched on an element of privilege. But last year, the White House, President Trump, signed an executive order where instead of for federal jobs, so for government jobs in the United States, the executive order moved the criteria away from employing people with degrees to people with the right skills. And this is a worldwide movement. We've seen very large multinationals make exactly the same move. The degree by itself does not have the currency that we may have thought it once did, rightly or wrongly. And again, Caroline touched on this a little bit. Not all degrees are the same. Not all institutions have the same ethos and philosophy and content and experiences underpinning their degrees. So what students are looking for are opportunities to learn in ways that maybe are not like some of those traditional ways. Google, of course, have launched their own career certificates, which rival university qualifications. And if I was a young person or even someone now looking to reskill and upskill to change my career after COVID, would I go back to a university and invest in the UK context a lot of money? And now it depends how much you're going to pay, because it's not always a lot of money for people depending on where they live, or there are government programs. But this move to unbundle education, and it's typically called the micro-credentialing movement. So I will put a link in the chat box to something that we maintain. I'm personally doing a lot of work in micro-credentialing, having served on the European Commission's consultation group, and where we produced a major report last year. But what we're seeing as a worldwide movement is people wanting smaller sized bite chunks of learning, more personalized learning opportunities. So my supermarket example before, whether that worked for you or not, in this case, it is more that the learner is wanting to have more choice over what it is that they're able to learn. Whether they choose chocolate or not, I guess, is up to the learner, if that metaphor analogy works. So I think we're going to see more pressure on universities to be responsive to this kind of demand for more personalized, flexible, just in time, just enough, just in case learning. So I'll stop on that note and see if we've got any questions, or go back to you.
Really interesting about the micro-credentials. I guess another question is ask if the universities are going to be ready to move towards that model. Let me check in the chat. I don't see any questions. I see one question from Eloise that is asking, do we have any links to share on speed friending techniques?
I think in response to that one, Louise has given a really detailed answer just above on the strategy and some of the kind of questions that that we provided. So if you give me a second, I'll find a couple of the example questions to share.
Wonderful. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts maybe on what Mark was touching on there. Some provocative ideas there. Continuing, I see a question there maybe.
While you're looking at the chat box to see if there are any questions, I always know that's a challenge when you're moderating at the same time. What we are seeing are the MOOC platforms in the UK context, more FutureLearn, but edX, Coursera, and of course Coursera has now privatized into the share market, or again now you can buy shares listed, is more of a co-design or co-construction model, where universities are partnering with industry partners and the MOOC platform. So it's a three-way partnership. Of course, when I say universities, we're talking about a very small number of universities, but this is a recognition that the old model isn't necessarily the model for everyone. Now, I wouldn't be advocating what I've been describing here necessarily for school leavers. That might be a very different experience we're talking about, which is why we shouldn't generalize. And I gave you one quote earlier from Michelle. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, all generalizations are dangerous, including this one.
Good one. And I see we have a question now. Continuing the food analogy in my language, how do we make the healthy but unappetizing greens of teaching and learning more appealing to students? Is there an educational magic sauce?
Well, I'm going to jump in. Sorry, Caroline, so do come back. But this was something I had to give a presentation earlier in the day. So I was explaining personalized learning and how many people see personalized learning using a restaurant or a food analogy, where instead of going into the restaurant where there are 20 items on the menu, some people see personalized learning as going in and now there are 100 items and you have more opportunity to personalize what it is that you want to eat. A much deeper conception of personalization is where you go into the restaurant not as a customer or a diner, but you go in because you get the opportunity to go into the kitchen to work with a master chef who knows more than you, but's willing to share their expertise. You may have brought in with you some of your ingredients that you've grown at home and organically, because you want to bring those in to fuse with what they already have, some ingredients that you just don't have access to. And there together you sit and you learn and you make this wonderful meal together, you co-construct it. So I'm not sure if that, again, metaphor or analogy works, but it's very different from just making more available on the menu.
Yeah, I would agree with the idea of co-creation, letting students have that control, letting them decide, if you give them an assessment, maybe giving them choice about how they complete it. Are they going to write an essay? Are they going to do a presentation? Are they going to make a video? Making them part of the process instead of just passive learners can really help them engage with your content. Helping them feel like they're contributing as well. And as I said before, just talking to them, listening to them, and making them feel like their voice is being heard. If they get something wrong, giving them feedback that helps them get it right next time round, and allowing them to learn by exploring the subject rather than just parroting back the facts to you, getting it wrong, trying something different, and coming back again.
Great, thanks. Really interesting. I see two more questions here, maybe before we wrap it up. I see one question: how much online learning should remain or be included in the future?
I guess from, sorry, Mark. From our perspective, we know we're going to be teaching in a blended way for quite some time, because COVID's going to be happening in different countries at different levels for a very long time. So even if we get things under control and open up universities in the UK, there's no guarantee that our students will be able to travel. So I think for the foreseeable, that's going to be the reality. But actually, as I said before, that removes so many barriers to learning, because even when a student's physically here, they might have childcare or other adult caring responsibilities that mean they can't make a lesson in person, or other preferences for learning that means that having stuff online or recorded or in different formats can really open up that learning experience. So I would say, I wouldn't say 100% online, but I think we need to make sure that we do keep some content on there to keep learning more available.
Yeah, and maybe Mark would take the last question. I'm not sure we have time to have much input on the previous one. What advice would you have specifically for grades 7 to 12 teachers who focus and on integrate career and college readiness across the curriculum in terms of this paradigm change in education?
Well, I'm in the luxury of not having my own children that are at that age. And I think that's one of the interesting outcomes of COVID experiences. Actually, it highlights the inequities where some of us didn't have to homeschool essentially. But the world is very different. And when we use these words online, perhaps digital learning is a good example. Some might say that digital is about the fusion of the online with the offline. Go and ask a young person what the word digital means. You'll find it very difficult. I'm using both my own experience, but also some of the research evidence to get an answer, because they've only grown up in the digital world. So in that sense, we shouldn't be trying to see these things as separate, online and offline. The world that even our graduates that are going to go into is most likely going to be like my world, where some of my day is online, some of my day is offline, but the distinction is very blurry. Okay, there will be people who will stand in shops and serve people, but a lot of what goes on behind the scenes is online. How do they order the stock? How do they manage the stock? So again, it's not helpful to see that distinction. Ultimately, and the link that I put in the chat box to answer the question, I guess, finally, is we believe that online learning is now an important life skill, and we shouldn't leave this to chance. And hence we developed in response to the COVID crisis the MOOC course that I've shared with you. So it is really important that we treat this very seriously, that our ability to continue to develop, advance our careers is going to involve online learning. There's no doubt about that in the future.
Thanks, Mark. I think those are great words to conclude this session. Unfortunately, I see there's a question that we won't have time to answer, but we have other sessions coming up, and I think that question might relate to some of the content that we'll be going over. So thanks again to Caroline King and Mark Brown, to our audience. If you haven't already signed up for the other talks, make sure to check them out on our website, and there's still some seats left. There's also a link to register that's going to be made available in the chat. The next session is also going to be hosted by Wooclap with Scott Hayden, who is a digital innovation specialist and EdTech demonstrator from the Department of Education at Basingstoke College of Technology, as well as Emma Ponsford, who's founder and learning science practitioner at Delecta, speaking about EdTech and its impact on teachers' role evolution. So thank you all for your participation, and to our wonderful speakers for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you in the other talks.
Thank you, Kieran.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.